I mean, Anna was already having to go through so much. She was already having to face the prospect of her child being removed from her at birth. The last thing that she needed to go through was then the prospect of having him adopted out by somebody she didn't even know.
From the Mamamia Podcast Network, I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter, candid conversations that count. On the last episode of No Filter, you heard Mary Pershall talking about her daughter Anna. Anna murdered the man that she lived with during her descent into mental illness and drug addiction back in 2015. And one of the aspects of Anna's story that so gripped the public's attention and heaped tragedy upon tragedy was that at the time she committed her crime, Anna was 18 weeks pregnant. Anna's family had already spent 28 years taking care of Anna in a myriad of different ways, physically, mentally, and emotionally, of course, as she became more and more incapacitated by her mental illness and by her drug addiction. It was an incredibly harrowing period, and at times, Anna's family didn't know if she would survive it. At times, they even feared for their own safety. But in amongst all of this, when Anna became pregnant and insisted on continuing with the pregnancy, despite not even being able to take care of herself and then being charged and found guilty of murder, what does your family do then? Who would take the child? What would you have done? Children's book author and journalist Katie Horneshaw has spent most of her life looking after her younger sister Anna. She says she's been like the third parent in that family, and I was originally just going to interview her mum, Mary, but when Mary came into Mamamia, Katie came with her. So after Mary and I had finished our conversation, which you can listen to in last week's episode if you scroll back in your feed, I invited Katie to pull up a chair and share her side of the story because I thought that was equally fascinating. Now, you might want to go back and listen to Mary's interview first. You'll hear her a little bit in my conversation with Katie as well. I can't imagine what this has all been like for you in terms of being, what do they say, the squeaky wheel gets the oil.
Yeah.
And you've grown up with a sister who has been more than a squeaky wheel. What's your relationship like with Anna now?
It's probably the first time I've really been able to have a friendship with her in my life because growing up, especially as I got older, I was almost just performing the role of like a third parent, especially because of my nature and who I am. Like I've performed that role for mum a little bit as well, like because, you know, mum's been growing up at the same time that I've been growing up. So we're much more peers. That's our relationship. And I've, you know, had times when I've sort of mentally rebelled against that, but there's no point. I mean, in the end, you just have to accept it. So, but my role in the family is very much as one of the adults and has been for a very long time. So,
and I guess as a daughter, certainly it comes through in the book and you're also an author and you've written your own book and you've written about your sister. A mother has a soft spot that a sister doesn't necessarily have. I think sometimes you've been able to see the situation in a more clear-eyed way.
Yeah. I think that, I guess, a lot of the time that was my role, I felt, with mum was mum's role was just to, you know, Anna was her baby and to do anything she could to make her happy no matter what that was. And especially as Anna got worse and worse, I wanted help for Anna just as much as mum and dad, but I was the one coming in and saying, like, you know, you can't just give her everything she wants, you know, you need to look at it from more of, as you say, I guess, a clinical viewpoint and give her tough love and try to give boundaries. But in the end, it just got to the point where no one could possibly have done that. But I definitely tried to be that kind of voice of reason. Yeah.
Katie, the part that we haven't touched on yet is that when Anna did commit murder, she was pregnant.
Yeah.
She was about halfway through her pregnancy.
Yeah, 18 weeks, was it, Mum? Yeah.
Did you know she was pregnant?
We did, yep. Yeah, we'd known for, a little while.
That must have been an ongoing fear of yours when she was sort of going off with guys and not taking care of herself. Was that something that you ever discussed? What will we do if she gets pregnant?
No, like, interestingly enough, I hadn't thought about that because, for one thing, I thought it was pretty unlikely that she'd get pregnant because she was doing all those drugs and alcohol. And I'd always, you know, read that, you know, if you drink, you don't get pregnant. I was trying to get pregnant myself at the time. And, like, I was like, you know, thinking, oh God, should I be cutting out caffeine? You know, and here's my sister.
Caffeinated tea? Should I have, maybe just stick to herbal?
Yeah. And so, no, to be honest, and when she did get pregnant, I was like, what? How does that even happen? But yes, I know.
That must have been incredibly upsetting in every way.
Well, yeah, my immediate thought was, well, obviously, you know, I mean, not to be blunt, but she's going to have to get rid of it. I mean, look at her life. Like, she's like literally, there is absolutely no way that she could safely take care of a child.
She can't take care of herself when she's living almost on the streets.
Yeah, essentially, yes. There was a very fine line between her and homelessness. By this stage, she was using ice. She was going in and out of full-blown psychosis where she thought, you know, that ASIO was after her and everybody was a spy in disguise. So she was very sick, and I just thought there wouldn't be any question. I thought that, but she wanted to keep it because it was another thing of, it was like pets in the past. It was like, this is going to fix my life. And she would talk about how she was going to be a really good mother and she was going to give up all of her vices, and she really believed that she could do that and she wanted to do that. So.
And so did you and your mum talk about, what are we actually going to do? What are even your rights in a situation like that?
Well, Mum had the same attitude to the pregnancy that she did to the pets. And Mum and Dad, they were like, well,
maybe
she wants
it'll
to
help.
have the kid. It was a pretty difficult situation in my relationship with Mum and Dad, because there was like Anna and Mum and Dad being like, it'll be all right, you know, we'll figure it out. And I'm like, oh my God, am I going insane? Like,
because there's a fine line between optimism and denial, isn't there?
Yeah, and so I was playing out the scenario in my head. Yeah, so I'm going, okay, so she's going to have the baby. More than likely the baby's going to have some sort of problems from the fact that, you know, yes, she was able to cut down a little bit on alcohol and stuff, but she was still smoking cigarettes, she was still smoking weed, and I don't know how much she was drinking. And
had been throughout the pregnancy.
Exactly. So I'm thinking, okay, so what? She's going to have the baby. The baby's going to be compromised in some way. Mum and Dad aren't going to take it. So I'm going to end up with it. Of course I'm going to end up with it. And then I tried to say that to Mum and Dad. I was like, we have to convince her to have an abortion because otherwise I'm going to end up with like a disabled baby.
Yeah.
And then, you know, Anna's going to be coming in and out of my life and maybe trying to, God knows what's going to happen with that. And then Mum and Dad go, no, just take it a day at a time. We'll just take it a day at a time.
Katie, you must have just looked at your future and just despaired.
Yeah, but no one would listen to me at that time. And now it turns out that I guess, you know, it's all worked out okay. But how could no, it hasn't worked out. It's worked out okay for Ollie. It hasn't all worked out okay. But, I mean, for Ollie himself, his life is good. But how could I have possibly, you know, known, you know, the turn of events that was going to take place? So, yeah, that was a difficult time for sure.
She gave birth in prison?
Not in prison. She gave birth when she was about 6 months into her prison term, but they take them to hospital.
And did you sit down and have a conversation with her about, I mean, was keeping the baby in jail an option?
Technically, they do have a program. It's a very small program where some of the mothers can have their young children in there with them for, I guess it's not a limited period of time, but there's limited places in the program.
Up to 4 years.
Up to 4 years, okay. And Anna did apply for the program, but it was never very likely that was going to happen because the program is designed to not disrupt the lives of children. So say if you're a mother and you're going in for a 3-month sentence and you've got a couple of young kids and there's nobody else to look after them. Rather than them go and be looked after by the state for 3 months, they come in with you, their lives are not uprooted to that same extent. Yeah, but with Ollie, it would have been that he would have been with her for a certain period of time and then taken out and then, you know, I guess given to me. So it wouldn't have, that's not really the purpose of the program, so it wasn't ever particularly likely.
Were there other options other than him coming to live with you? Could he have been put up for adoption? Was that something that was ever considered?
No, I don't think so. I mean, Anna was already having to go through so much. She was already having to face the prospect of her child being removed from her at birth. The last thing that she needed to go through was then the prospect of having him adopted out by somebody she didn't even know and, you know, potentially getting very little contact with him. So at least this way, she still has a really good relationship with him and is able to have that contact with him.
Was it a difficult conversation with your partner, Tom? He seems like a great guy.
Yes, because initially, before Anna went into prison, and when Mum first asked us about it, I just said, no, I'm not taking him, no way, because, or we didn't know he was him at this stage, but I said, because the reason I was saying that is because I thought if I made it clear that I wasn't going to take the baby, then maybe Anna would see some sense and do what I thought needed to be done.
You didn't want to give her an easy way out,
yes,
or an escape hatch.
Yeah, so we were at that stage saying no, because we thought that the baby was going to have all sorts of issues as well.
And you were trying to have your own family at that time.
Yeah. So initially we said definitely no, and then when Anna went into prison and she was off the drugs and it was past the time where she could have an abortion anyway, Tom and I had the conversation and said, well, obviously now we have to take him. But I forgot to talk to Mum about it. So Mum found out much later. So when Mum called me, she was like, what are we going to do with this baby? And I was like, oh, I'll take him. And she's like, oh, really? Oh, thank God.
Because there wasn't really a plan B.
Yeah, there was no plan B.
So were you there when she gave birth?
Mum was. I was there a few hours later.
What was that like?
Oh, well, it was just such a mixture of joy and pain. I mean, it was, when he came out, I knew as soon as I saw him that he was fine. And he was so bright, his big wide open eyes, and, I just thought, this is a wonderful baby, but,
Did she get to
he
spend
had to be
some time
taken
with
away
him?
from his mother, which was, even though she'd done such a terrible thing, it's still horrible to see a mother separated from a newborn baby.
Did she get to spend much time with him?
No. She got to have the first cuddle, but he was a meconian birth, so he needed to be in special care for 24 hours to make sure that he was okay. And by the time he was out of special care, she was back at the prison.
Whew, that must have been rough.
I felt so sorry for her. You know what it's like after you feel like after you've given birth. And, she just had to be... But she had a lot of love and support. The girls were great with her.
In the
when she went
prison.
back, yeah.
And Katie, you get handed a newborn. When you decided to take Ollie, did you stop trying to get pregnant yourself?
Yeah, because I was like, well, I don't want two. And this one's potentially going to be really difficult.
That's a bit lazy of you.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was all really crazy it's just so crazy the way the world works. But, yeah, so I was waiting in special care for him to be ready. And once they took him out of the incubator, they handed him to me. And I spent a couple of days in hospital with him. But they said I could spend longer, but the room wasn't big enough for anybody else to be there. And I was like, no, I want to go home so I can get some help. And I remember the first night in hospital, because I only found out I was going to get him 3 days beforehand. I didn't know.
Why? What did you think? You thought he might stay in the prison for a little while?
Yeah, I thought that Anna might get approved for her, because she'd applied.
So you were essentially pregnant for 3 days?
Yeah, we didn't prepare or anything, because I didn't want Anna to be waiting to hear to see if she would get him in the prison.
Wow.
And meanwhile, me be do cots and stuff. And do you know what I mean? Oh yeah, I'm just going to take him off you. So it was really weird. And in a way, I wanted Anna to have him, even though I knew that it probably wasn't a very good idea for him. I still, emotionally, I wanted that for her. So I had it in my head, I'm not taking him. So then 3 days beforehand, it was like, oh, okay, right.
Switch
so now
gears.
I've got 3 days to get ready for a newborn, because he was born right on his due date. So, yeah, that first night when I couldn't calm him down and they said that, you're not allowed to lie down with them. You're supposed to just, put them back in their little cot
Oh, yeah,
thingy.
the books say that.
Yeah.
Lots of advice.
Yeah, and they'd keep, I'd lie down with him and he'd go to sleep on my chest, but then they'd come and catch me and go, no, you're not allowed to do that. Put him back in his little thing. And I was like, but then he cries and I can't sleep. And I was like, didn't sleep at all that night or the next night. And I was like, this is a horrible... Why did I do this? This is bloody awful. And I was like, I've got to go home so people can help me.
Yeah.
Once I got home, I settled into it and I just felt like a normal mum. But yeah, that first night in the hospital, I was like, what have I signed up? Can we adopt him out?
Yeah, is it too late? How do you view him? Like, is he your child? Do you feel like you're his auntie?
He's like my child. Like, he calls me mummy, and I mean, I've had him since birth, and I'll continue to have him. So it's kind of almost like the other way around. Like, Anna's sort of like the auntie figure.
What does he call her?
He calls her mama. So he calls me mummy and her mama. But I think he sort of thinks of her in that kind of auntie role. And he's just got a lot of carers that just love him because mum and dad are very heavily involved in his care. We are in Melbourne every weekend because we take him to the prison, and I take him for his Sunday visits as well. So I have to go to the prison either once or twice every weekend. So mum and dad take him a lot of the weekend, and then he's got Tom as well. And then he's got Anna, who loves him very much. So he's just got a huge amount of love. And care. Yeah.
And for him, this is all he's ever known. You're his mum, Tom's his dad. He's got grandma and grandpa, and then he's got Auntie Mama.
Yeah.
In the funny place.
Yeah, the big
where
house.
everyone wears green.
The big house.
The big house.
Yeah.
Where everyone wears green jumpsuits.
We didn't tell him to call it that.
No, and if he ever sees a big, like a big building, we go past that and he goes, "Oh, a big house, Mama house."
So he just accepts all of it.
Yeah, I guess that's what kids do. And I mean, he loves going there because the guards absolutely adore him. He's like a little celebrity because they've all known him.
Watched him grow up.
Yeah, and so, he comes into the visitors centre and one of the older guards who, he's a real softie, but he sort of pretends to be a bit grumpy, and he goes, "Oh no, here comes Ollie. I'll let the Ollie-itis begin," is what he usually says. And everyone's comes up to him, Ollie, high five. Oh, give us a hug. How you going?
So he's got a lot of aunties.
Yes.
And uncles.
Yeah.
Because he went in there the first time when he was 5 days old to visit, so
And
I've watched him grow up since then.
Those visits, I imagine they've changed over time. Does Anna feel like, is she at peace with the situation? Is she anguished about not being with him?
I don't think so. I think she's adjusted to it much better than I thought she would. And she's just so glad that he's with family and she sees him so often because she sees other women in that prison whose kids are in state care, who don't see their children for months, sometimes years on end. And they all tell her how lucky she is, which is good for her to hear. Your family's so devoted. You get to see your little boy every weekend. So she knows that she's very privileged.
And Katie, without wanting to sort of pry, you must have had to deal with levels of resentment that your whole life has been so dominated and will be dominated forever now that you've got this child who is essentially yours, has been dominated by your sister, and that you haven't in many ways had control of your own story?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've come to terms with it. Yeah, I definitely went through a period maybe sort of in my early to mid-20s where I was sort of trying to get, like, I was resentful, and I was seeing psychologists and they were telling me, "Oh, you're not getting enough attention," or, what you basically said, where you've sort of, all of your problems have been ignored because Anna's problems have been
bigger. And
also I don't, I have to put forward a front of happiness and of, like, I know that I need to perform that role for mum and dad. So
you've got to be the good child.
Yeah, I don't want to burden them with my stuff too much. So there was a while when I was resentful of that. And so I was like trying to sort of figure that out with mum and dad. But I mean, eventually I just was like, it's not that bad. Like, I mean, people have a lot worse problems than this. And it's just, that's my role in the family, to sort of be supportive to mum and dad. And mum is very supportive to me as well. It's just that it's more of a friendship rather than mum being sort of up here and me down here, and mum, we're like this. And I've just come to terms with my role in the family. I'm not resentful about it anymore. There was a time when I was like, but I've got problems too. I had an eating disorder too, and I used to think, oh, mum doesn't, she never paid enough attention.
And you had anxiety as well.
Yeah. I've got my share of mental illness, that's for sure. But I used to think,
don't we all?
They're not paying enough attention to my stuff. But I mean,
how old are you now?
I'm 32. God.
And do you still think you'll have biological children?
I don't know. Like, we were definitely having a bit of trouble. So, to be honest, maybe not, because now I'm sort of concentrating on my career and I'm kind of just happy with Ollie at the moment. So the way I'm looking at it is, you know what, if it happens in the future, it happens. Yeah. But if it doesn't, it doesn't. And I think I'm like totally happy either way. So it's not something that I'm really concentrating on right now.
How do you both feel about the prospect of Anna coming out of prison in about 10 years, 11 years?
We don't really like to think about it, like, because it's it is a scary thought, because she's so settled there and she gets those boundaries that she needs. It's somehow in that time she's going to have to learn how to set up her own boundaries so that when she comes out she doesn't need boundaries that are enforced by barbed wire and electric fencing and guards with guns, you know. And she was never able to do that before. So there's just no way. Like, I think all we can do is just, because we don't know what she's going to be like in 10 years' time. So, you know, maybe when we've got 2 years to go, we'll start freaking out.
That's
then.
What we're hoping for, is that. But at the moment, it's a scary prospect.
Does she want to get out?
I don't think so at this point.
No. She said that if she had the option to get out, she'd leave, go and have a glass of wine and a cigarette and come back in.
But it's to show you how scary the prospect is for us. Katie and John and I all have a recurring nightmare, which is very similar, where Anna turns up somewhere in our lives. Like, she might just turn up in the lounge room, or in the dream, or she might
it's
be
like,
beside
guess what?
us
I'm out
in
of
the
jail.
car.
Yeah.
And my latest one was, they've let me out for a day, Mum. Let's go shopping. And I'm like, oh my God. And then
so that's your biggest fear, obviously.
But the thing is, when all of it, we've talked about this, when we wake up, we're like, that second when you think it's real and you think, thank God she's still in prison.
Yeah.
Because she's safe.
Yeah. Yeah. And
so I think that's what a lot of people couldn't understand, that, you'd have a nightmare about her getting out of prison instead of being in prison.
Yeah.
And Ollie will be at an age, I imagine there's not a question that he would go and live with her. He's settled. He's got his mum and his dad.
Yeah.
And he'll also be at an age where he'll have the tools and the language to be able to deal with the situation and draw some of his own boundaries at that age, because he'll be, 10 or 11?
Yeah.
13 by the time he gets out.
Okay. So he'll be able to,
I think I'm glad that he's going to be old enough to have had some time to process it, to get ready for it. He will already have that relationship with Anna. I imagine, that their relationship will just continue to be fairly similar to, what it's been. That, if she can provide a safe place for him, I'm more than happy for him to go and visit her. But I don't think that she has any illusions of thinking that I don't think she'd even want to take him full time, to be honest. Yeah. So. Who would want to take a 13-year-old boy for the first time full time? I'd be like, you can have him. Take him.
That's a good time to be in prison, I think. Listen, thank you both so much for sharing your story. It's such an important one, because the fact that you're both able to be so articulate and that you're writers and that you've been so generous to share such a painful story. It's the story of so many people who've got someone in their lives with mental health issues or with addiction issues. What you describe is sadly so common. And yet I imagine when it happens to you, you feel such levels of isolation and shame and fear and despair, that just to be able to name it, and the advocacy that you're both doing. Anna is very, very, very lucky to have you both in her lives. What exceptional women you are.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to No Filter. You can buy Mary's book, Gorgeous Girl, at any bookstore or at apple.co/Mamma Mia. And all proceeds of this book are going to a charity that helps women in trauma. Next week on No Filter, the one and the only Olivia Newton John.
I was coming up with all the excuses in the world why I couldn't play it. And one of them was, I can't do an American accent. So they called me back and said, okay, we'll make you an Aussie. Well, thank you. Okay.
Now, if you're looking for something else to listen to, can I recommend checking out our brand new podcast, You Beauty? It's the podcast for your face, and it may sound weird to have a podcast about beauty, but it's kind of like listening to two friends just talking about all the stuff that you need to know. The products that you should get, the things that you shouldn't bother wasting your money on, whether you really need a primer, what are the cheapest and best mascaras. It's just a really fun conversation between girlfriends. So if you have a face and you want to know what to put on it, as well as hair and a body, this is the show for you. You can find it in your podcast app if you just search You Beauty. This podcast was produced by Eliza Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman, and I'll see you on the homepage, mamamia.com.au.